Well, hey, as we kick off the new year, we're diving into this series, Best Year Never. And, I just kind of will tell you this. We're not going to be the church that lies to you. You're going to have a great year, I'm sure, but in some ways, your year is going to be awful. And so we're just kicking out the year saying, hey, I'm never going to lie to you, Catherine. I'm just never going to lie to you, right? And so we're just saying, hey, what does it look like to build a life right out of the gate that can survive difficult moments or difficult seasons in the year? And we're all kicking the year off, right, with things that we call resolutions, right? We'll throw that up there, right? We all have some kind of like resolution for the year, or maybe you don't like the word resolutions. I know a lot of people now, like it's very trendy to go online and say like, I'm anti-resolutions. I don't like resolutions. I have goals, right? I have hopes. I have targets. I have whatever. You got stuff, right? There are things in your life that you're coming into this year, right, that you are excited about changing and improving and developing, and you've got a plan, right? Like you've got a journal and maybe a checklist, and like it's on a whiteboard, so it's definitely gonna happen because it made the whiteboard, right? Like you're coming into the year with things that you hope to accomplish, right, and to improve in your life. We'll say like resolutions. Just for fun, I was doing a little research. Let's check out the top 10 resolutions from 2023. These were the things that people like you and I started our year off with last year. We said we wanted to improve our fitness, we wanted to improve our finances, we wanted to improve our mental health, we wanted to lose weight, we wanted to improve our diet, we wanted to make more time for loved ones, stop smoking, learn a new skill, make more time for hobbies. I'm still looking for a hobby, by the way, 35 years in, and improve our work-life balance, right? That's a pretty good list, good things, right? That we started last year saying, hey, these are the things that we're looking to improve upon, right? Looking to achieve, looking to accomplish in our life. So just for fun, let's check out Forbes, again, kind of ran the same survey going into this year. And they put out the 2024 top 10 New Year's resolutions. They said we want to improve our fitness, improve our finances, improve our mental health, lose weight, improve diet, make more time for loved ones, stop smoking, learn a new skill, make more time for hobbies, and improve our work-life balance. How we doing? Right? And if I were going to bet money, I'd kind of go ahead and predict 2025's year's list as well, right? Because it's kind of the same list. How many of you would say, hey, the resolution that I have or the goal that I have for this year is at least in the same vein or pretty darn similar to one I've had before, right? Like how many of you would just say, like, I just moment of honesty, right? You can't lie in church, right? Like I've kind of had some version of this one in my life before, right? But it's a new year, and this is the year that just maybe it will happen. I'd kind of say it this way, right? I feel like a lot of times in life, we are constantly striving, and maybe this is me, but we are constantly striving, but rarely improving. You can throw that up there. We are constantly striving, but rarely improving, right? Like we start the new year with expectations and anticipations and hopes and dreams and things that we are resolving ourselves to. And we're like, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to strive towards it. But then somewhere along the way, we get knocked down just a little bit, right? And we kind of look for the next January to do it all over again. It kind of feels to me sometimes like life is like a game I used to play with my 2-year-old. So we would, she would have these stacking cups. A lot of people have these, right? Like you just kind of stack these cups up. And one thing that 2-year-olds love to do is not stacking things. And 2-year-olds love just knocking things over, right? And so me being, only mildly competitive in life, decided that at 2 years old, we needed some level of competition between us to really connect, right? And so I just made a game out of it. The game was, how many cups can I get on top of each other before Addie just comes back over and just knocks it down? And I never got all the way. I was constantly building, right? Constantly adding things. But it didn't matter, right? Always, she would show up and just in one whack, just knock the thing over and take me back to January in a way, right? So there's this cycle that I feel like, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but this cycle that I feel like I live in often when it comes to resolutions. Maybe you've experienced this cycle as well. It's a cycle that begins with frustration, which is a weird thing to say, right, when we start out the new year, because we start the new year with hopes and anticipations and dreams. But I'm willing to bet that most of your resolutions are actually built out of a frustration that you have in your life, maybe even a frustration that you have in yourself. Like, why did I eat so many of those cookies over the break, right? Or like, why didn't I hit the gym a few more times in 2023? Or why haven't I figured out a good rhythm for my schedule in my life? Why can't I figure out how to cram it all in there, right? Like there's this frustration within us, right? That leads us to go, okay, I've got to do something about this. And so we create a resolution, right? And so we create this resolution. We say, hey, this is going to be the time, this is going to be the moment, this is going to be the season that I do this, right? We create a resolution. Again, you might call it a goal, a plan, a dream, what have you, right? But we've got these resolutions that we create, right? And then something happens along the way in life, right? A little bit of disappointment sets in. And it doesn't even have to be disappointment connected to the resolution, right? It can be disappointment in any area of life, right? Something happened to you, right? Someone hurt you, something hindered you from accomplishing what you wanted to accomplish. Maybe you found out the resolution was bigger than you had time to squeeze it in, right? But something happened, right? Life circumstances come. Usually it's something that you couldn't expect. Often it's something that has nothing to do with the resolution that you set to begin with, right? But something happens in life that creates this disappointment, right? That then leads, and again, maybe it's just me, but then often leads us to what I call like derailment, right? That kind of throws us off of the thing that we said that this year was going to be about. That kind of holds us back or gets us distracted from the thing we said we were going to build this year. That holds us from creating the life that we hoped and desired to begin to create, right, in this season. And it derails us. And I'll just be honest with you, I'll just tell you kind of my derailment symptoms, things that for me I experience when disappointment comes in, right? And again, the disappointment may be connected to my resolution. Often it's not. Often it's a completely different area of my life, right? But some things that I experience when I experience derailment, right? We can just throw those up on the screen here. I wake up late. I start waking up late, right? I start eating poorly. I start losing track of time. I stop working out. I get frustrated all over again, right? Which makes me feel like I just need to set one more resolution. And then I do the worst thing that I know that I could possibly do in my life. Like this is when I know I've really gone off the rails. I stop flossing. Which sounds crazy to you because some of you haven't picked up some string in about 5 years, and I get it, right? But it sounds weird, right? But flossing for me is like a keystone habit, right? Like, it's like, what's that guy? That guy gave like an armed military general gave a speech one day, you're at a college graduation. It was like, make your bed. Anybody ever see this speech, right? Like, make your bed. If you wake up in the morning, you make your bed, then every other discipline in life follows after. I'm similar. I'm just floss. That's all you gotta do. Floss. There's something about it for me that's like, I don't enjoy it. I don't really know if it makes a difference or not, but I know I'm supposed to do it. And so when I make the choice to do it, everything's like, okay, if I can do that, everything else can flow from that, even in the moments that I don't feel like doing those things either. And so when I stop flossing, I actually realize like, oh man, I am off the rails, right? It's weird, I know. But here's what I say, right? None of these things are typically connected to the area that I actually experience disappointment in. They're just ways that my life gets thrown off kilter by the disappointment that I experience or as a result of experiencing that disappointment. Or another way I'd say that is this, that disappointment in one area, for me at least, leads to derailment in most areas of life. When I experience disappointment in one piece of my life, I kind of experience derailment in every area of life. When I experience disappointment in my family, I find that things at work also start to slip as well. When I experience disappointment in finances, I find that my time begins to derail as well. When I experience disappointment in my health, I find that other things begin to flow with it also. And often in life, the things that we find ourselves going, man, like one day I'm going to get this right. And one day I'm going to land this. Or one day I'm going to start the next year without the same resolutions that I started the last year with. Or one day I'm going to finally build that business that I dreamed of. Or one day I'm finally going to spend that time with my family that I've hoped for. Or one day I'm finally going to get all of the health things lined up for me. One day I'm finally going to pursue or even actually accomplish that dream that I've been sitting on and hoping for and thinking about. One day I'm finally going to get my relationship with my spouse just lined up. One day we're finally going to do those date nights consistently. Right? Those things that we find ourselves constantly getting on and off track and back on track and then off track again and back on track and back off track again, rarely are actually the place where we're experiencing disappointment. It's disappointment in other areas of life that come over and knock the whole thing down. And so as we kick off the new year, as we begin to dream of things that we want for the next 12 months and ways that we desire to build our life further and stronger and better, I think it's worth us pausing for just a few minutes this morning to ask this question, right? How do we build a life that can bear the weight of disappointment? How do we build a life that can be sustained even when things that we can't expect come in and try to knock and beat against us? How do we build that kind of life? And the reality is, you and I have seen people with lives like this, right? There are people in your life, I'm willing to bet, there are people you look up to. People who have been down the road a little bit further, or just seems to have figured things out a little bit more. That live life with what I call a little bit more ballast in the ship, right? They have a little bit more centeredness to them. They seem to be a little bit less wavered or disappointed or knocked off track when disappointment comes in. About 10 years ago, some of you have heard me talk about this, about 10 years ago, I walked through a season of life where I just found myself massively disappointed in a career thing, right? I found myself working in an organization that became very frustrating for me and disappointing for me. It wasn't what I hoped it would be, and it didn't end the way that I hoped that it would end. And I had a friend who was about 20 years older than me, who also was in the same organization, actually started almost the same time I did, experienced the same season of that organization that I did. God ended up in the exact same place I ended up in, and ended up being removed from that organization or kind of disconnected from it in a similar way that I was. And I was freaking out and upset and frustrated and a mess, and I felt like my whole life had been knocked over. And he was centered, had gravity, had a sense of purpose, didn't lose sight. And I kept looking, going, how does he walk through the same journey I am, but find himself carrying it totally differently? Like, how does he stay grounded in the midst of all this? And we're going to dive into a story today that Jesus shares with us, actually early in the life of his ministry, as he begins to talk with us and talk with his earliest followers about how to live in the world and how they ought to live in the world in a way that would kind of bring this new way of living and this new kingdom into the earth. We're going to dive into a story that most of us in the room are pretty familiar with. In fact, most of us probably got some Sunday school version of the story. I'm just going to say this right out of the gate. The way that this story was presented to most of us kind of misled us a little bit, or led us to misunderstand it just slightly. And because of that, I don't think it ever really fully took root. At least it didn't for me for much time. Right? But if we would begin to understand this story in the way that Jesus originally taught it to his earliest followers, I think that we would glean something from it. Let me tell you the story in the way that most of us received it, right? The way most of us received the story, if you grew up in church, if you didn't, none of this will make sense to you. Well, I promise we'll get you up to speed, right? But if you grew up in church, if you grew up in some kind of Sunday school environment or any kind of space like that, right? If you watch VeggieTales, I don't know, right? Like, you got some version of this story that Jesus tells, right? Jesus says, hey, there were two men in the world, right? And they were both going to build a house. You can put this next slide on the screen. He says, one man was a wise man, and he built his house on a rock. He said that waves came and wind blew, and the house stood strong. And then another man went to build a house, but he went over here, and he tried to build his house on the sand. Sounds like a really stupid thing to do. And the waves came, the wind blew, and his house fell down. And you're like, of course it did. What idiot would build a house right next to the ocean? It's the literal beach, right? But the way that Jesus actually tells this story is a little different than the picture many of us got, right? Many of us got a picture like this of two men who built two houses in two different places. And many of us are told that, hey, if you will just begin to believe in Jesus, you will shift your life from building it on this very soft, gooey, unreliable stuff, right, to building it on a rock, right? If you just believe in Jesus, like the location of your life and the location of where you're building would shift and change, and everything in your life would begin to be different, right? You experience life in a different way. If you would just believe Jesus, right, you're going to experience a shift of location in your life from one place that's really, really not well founded in the world. Sometimes we're just told, like, in the world. She's like, what's the world? I don't know. Like, right, to this place of centeredness and gravity and rock, and it's going to be steady and it's going to be strong. There's two things I'd like to offer you this morning before we dive into the text about this. Two things that I think we may have, that may help us kind of correct some misunderstanding in that. The first one's this. believing in Jesus might not change your life. Believing in Jesus might not immediately shift everything from one place to another. Right? We talk about believing in Jesus, right? There's this promise of eternal life. But in this life today, your tomorrow, believing in Jesus may not shift all of that. Another thing is this: when Jesus tells this story, he's not talking about where to build your life. He's talking about how you build your life. And he's talking to a group of people that I think probably are more similar to us than we like to admit. And a group of people that we often miss identifying when we were presented the story. So let's dive into the text. The Gospel of Luke tells us that Jesus says to some of the earliest people gathering around him to listen and to hear from him, he says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you?" Let's stop right there. This is a rebuke right out of the gate. This is not Jesus looking at a group of people who don't believe in him, right? This isn't Jesus looking at a group of people who aren't coming around to hear his teachings, right? This is a group of people that Jesus is saying, "Why do you call me Lord?" In other words, master would be another way of translating that. Why do you put me in a place of authority? Why do you act like I have something of value to say to you, right? But you do not do what I tell you. This is a rebuke to some of the earliest people who came to listen to him and learn from him. "Why do you call me Lord and not do what I tell you? Everyone who comes to me and hears my word and does them," so people who aren't like you, everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, "I will show you what he is like." And then he starts to paint a picture, not of them, but of others. He says those people are like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when a flood arose, the stream broke against that house and could not shake it because it had been well built. This isn't about where he built his house. This is about the work that he chose to do in the earliest stages of building his house. He dug deep below that sandy topsoil. He dug into the earth to find something deeper and more centered. He dug until he found the bedrock below it. Something sure, something that he could build his life upon. This is about going deeper before you build higher. And then he goes on to paint a picture of what the life is like for the people he's talking to. The people who call him Lord yet don't do what he says. He says, "But the one who hears and does not do them," the one who hears my words, the way this gets translated, it's the one who hears and does not put them into practice. It's like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. He didn't do the work. He didn't dig deep. When the stream broke against it, immediately it fell. And the ruin of that house was great. Everything about where these two men are building is the same. This isn't about changing location. This isn't about going to find another place. This isn't about shifting your life in a moment or an instant to be in a different spot. This is about how you build on the ground that you have. This is about what it looks like to dig deeper before you build higher. So I meant it when I said it a few minutes ago. Believing in Jesus might not change your life. Jesus says this directly to those people. You can throw that there. He says, "Why do you call me Lord? Why do you put me in a place of authority, but not do what I tell you?" Believing in Jesus might not change your life, right? But following Jesus lays a foundation that will sustain you for a lifetime. It's the work of actually putting it into practice that makes the difference in this lifetime. It's the work of actually saying, what does he actually ask of me in this moment or this area or this piece of my world. And then doing it and applying it. It's the work of actually digging deeper to find something more centering and stronger to build upon. I'd say this. You can believe in Jesus and not follow him. It's perfectly possible to believe in Jesus and not follow him. In fact, many of us know people like this. Some of you decided not to associate with Jesus because of some of the people who you saw associating themselves with Jesus. And you saw them claim and put him in a position of Lord, or put him in a position of master or of authority, right? You saw them kind of leading from this place of stated belief in Jesus. But when you looked at their life, you didn't see them following Jesus. You didn't see anything actually different. It's quite possible to believe in Jesus and not follow him. I'd say the opposite is also true, though. It's quite possible to follow Jesus without believing in him. In fact, I dare say this, the earliest followers of Jesus started following him before they actually believed in him. They just answered a call from a rabbi who said, "Follow me." And as they began to follow, they began to learn and understand. And that is when their belief showed up. It was the act of following that actually led them to belief, not the other way around. And so I'd say this to you. If you're in the room this morning, you go, "I don't know about Jesus. I don't know what I actually think of him," right? I know people have been following his words for 2,000 years, right? He's full of a lot of wisdom. It seems like he's a good teacher. Seems like he has a lot of wisdom to share. It's quite possible. In fact, I'd even encourage you to begin following that and saying, what does he have for me in my life right now? What is there that I might actually be able to build my life upon? What is it about his way that people have found to be more centering and more strengthening for thousands of years? You can start right there and follow without believing. But for all of us, regardless of where you are in that spectrum or in that journey, I'd say this. This is kind of the invitation or the challenge for us as we go into the new year, right? A new year that's going to be filled with a lot of good, but also filled with disappointment. Before resolutions, foundations. Before you set and pursue goals and dreams and aspirations, before you chase some of the same things that you've chased in years past, ask yourself, what are the things below the surface that I need to develop? Where might I have stated belief but not actually chosen to follow? Where might I actually be building on something that's not strong enough to bear the weight of disappointment in my life? Maybe this, where should I dig deeper before I build higher? Where should I lean in and seek to discover what Jesus says for me and what it looks like to actually follow this year? So that as I pursue all of those hopes and dreams, as I build that business or reorient my time or figure out how to manage it all, as I get that piece of my life back into shape, so that as you build those things that you hope for this year, when disappointment comes, when the rain falls and the storm hits, when everything seems to be pushing against you, you find yourself centered on something that will sustain you through it all. You find yourself with a little more ballast in the ship. You find yourself with a life that can stay steady and strong in the hardest of moments. And you'll find yourself entering 2025, not with the same things you entered this year hoping for, with a life that looks different, with a life that survived the hardest parts of this year. With a life that's ready for what's to come in the next one. Listen, this is why we do things here like Fight Club. Fight Club kicks off tonight, right? I'm going to be there. I'll tell you why I'm going to be there. Because in the couple of months of craziness and moving and changing locations and changing jobs and moving into a temporary house and trying to find a real house and all that stuff, I look back on the last couple of months of my life and I go, there are pieces of the foundation that I've lost sight of in my own world that I've got to recenter for myself, that I've got to lean back into, pieces and ways of following in the way of Jesus that I've missed out on over the last couple of months. And Fight Club for me, in a lot of ways, is a recalibration. It's an opportunity for me to dig deeper as I go into a new year of building higher. Man, if you haven't signed up for that, I'd encourage you to join us tonight. I think it kicks off around 9 o'clock, which sounds crazy. But you know why it kicks off at 9 o'clock? Because you have nothing scheduled tonight at 9 o'clock. And I'm pretty sure that you can make it. Okay? So I hope you'll be a part of that. Let me say this too. If you call this church your home, I'm just going to ask you to make this a priority as we head into January. To prioritize digging deeper in your life right now in this season and laying a foundation that we can build our lives upon. I'll tell you why. I couldn't be more excited for the year ahead of our church. The things that are happening here already over the last 4 weeks are shocking and mind-blowing to me. The ways that we're seeing people lean in and engage with us surprise me every Sunday. The stories that we hear throughout the week catch me off guard in the best of ways every week. And what's happening here matters. And I genuinely believe in the life of our church. 2024 is going to be a year that we look back on 10 years from now, and we still reference and remember because of the way that God worked in the life of this church. But when he shows up and works in the life of this church, it's going to be through the people who call this church home. And as we go into that, we can jump into, when we hit February, we're having the best time in February. We're going to have team night. We're going to cast vision for what the year looks like at team night. We're going to go into February. We're going to do a big vision casting series in February and talk about everything that we're going to build in this year and the years to come and all the ways we feel like God is leading this church forward. And we're so excited about that. And I think it's going to happen. And God's going to do some great stuff. We're going to build a great church. But if we build that church without laying the foundation in our own hearts, we're going to set ourselves up to be a people who can't handle disappointment down the road. And the things that we build will find themselves on faulty foundations. So if you call this church your home, I'm asking you as we lean into this series, for the sake of you, but also for the sake of the people around you, for the sake of what we're building, would you lean in a little bit more? Would you dig just a little bit deeper? Would you find for you a stronger foundation to build your life on as we build this church together? There's 3 things we're going to focus on over the next 3 weeks. We're going to talk about specifically some ways that we can build foundations within our life, or 3 areas of our life where we can deepen our foundations. The first one is time and how we use it and the things that we allow our time to flow to. The second one is community, relationships, the ways that we lean in and build a community today that can be there for us in the hardest moments of life. And the third one is our finances. And you might go, why would the finances seems a little bit like out of the subject, right? Like, why would we talk about finances in a series about building foundations? And I'll tell you this, I'm willing to bet about half of the disappointments in your life have some level of connection or impact on your finances and your money. And often we find ourselves knocked over in that area of our life, or we feel ourselves knocked over by things in our life because of the way that we view our finances and the ways that we view our money. And so we're going to talk about that as well. And go, how do we build a foundation within our finances as well? And we're not talking about just how to develop a savings account. It's not that. No. How do we actually build a foundation in the way that we understand and view the resources that God trusts us with so that we can sustain a healthy view of those resources in the hardest of moments in our life? We're going to talk about those 3 ways that we can build a foundation over the weeks to come. I'm going to ask you to be a part of each one of those, especially if you call this church your home. I'm going to ask you to be a part of each one of those weeks as much as you can. I'm going to ask you to lay a foundation in each one of those areas, and I can't wait to see what God does through us and through this church as we dig deeper and build higher. All right? We're going to wrap up this morning in a little bit of a different way. We're going to sing a song together. It's kind of been an anthem for me coming into this series. It's a song that, I'll tell you a little bit about my journey with the song. So I mentioned earlier, there's a season of life that I walked through about 10 years ago where myself and someone who was about 30 years older than me walked through at the same time. And I walked through it in one way and he carried it in a very different way, right? And the week before I actually came here to spend my first weekend hanging out with you guys and learning about the Co and exploring the opportunities here, I got a phone call letting me know that he actually had passed away. And he had been sick for a little while. He passed. And so the day before I flew to Minnesota, I drove to Georgia to be a part of his celebration of life. And I walked in, and you go to these things, and they usually give you like a little order of service or like a piece of paper or a pamphlet, like a rundown of what's going to happen. And they had the songs that they decided to sing, and they were songs that had been very important to him, right? Some of his favorite songs. And one of them was a song that I looked at, and immediately had like a negative response to it, because I'll just be honest with you, it's not a song that I actually liked very much. I know that sounds weird. It's like a worship song. I'm a pastor. I'm supposed to like worship songs. But art is subjective, right? Like, it's like anything. You have opinions about things. And it just was a song. Like, it was just one of those that it just never quite resonated with me. I never quite did it. And then we started singing the song. And part of the lyrics of that song say these words, something like, Christ is my firm foundation. He's never let me down. It goes on to say he's faithful through every generation. Why would he fail now? He won't. And as we sang that song, I realized the difference between his life and mine 10 years ago, the difference between the way he was able to carry that season and the way that I was able to carry that season, was that he believed those words, the depth of him in that season. He had lived enough life. He had followed Jesus closely enough. He had journeyed through disappointment with Jesus enough to find those words to be true. So as we sing this song to end our time together, some of us are going to sing this song as a statement of, yeah, I've been there, I've seen it, I get it, that's so true for me. And some of us are going to sing this song as more of a vision for our life. Maybe something that we find ourselves hoping for and aspiring to. And some of us may find ourselves not singing it all. Some of us may find ourselves just in a moment of reflection and processing and pondering and thinking, and that's perfectly fine as well. So I'm going to ask you to do this. I'm going to invite you to stand with me, if you would. I'm going to pray for us. I'd love for us to sing together. God, in this room are stories. God, stories of people who could talk to us for hours about the ways that you have carried them in life's hardest moments. And God, those stories are the culmination of a season in their life, but it's also a culmination of the life that they built with you. And God, as we reflect on what you might be doing in our world, in our life, in each of our lives, but also in the life of our church, God, would you help us to see where you would have us to lean in closer and follow you more? God, where would you have us to dig deeper in our own lives? Where would you have us to do the work of actually following you? To do the work of actually putting your words into practice? God, would you help us to be honest with ourselves? Would you help us to see where we may misalign with you? Would you help us to see where you might be calling us to strengthen the ground, the foundation that we build our lives upon? And God, over the next 3 weeks, would you bring our eyes to the things that you would have us to lean into? The practices you would have us to follow, the habits you would have us to implement, the things that you would have us to do. And God, may we be people who are able to look back and say, I weathered that storm. I survived that season. I was unmoved and unwavered because of the foundation that I laid well in advance of that hardship. God, we love you. We trust you to show up in our lives as we seek you. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.